Thank you to everybody who worked to make this reading possible. And thank you in particular to Dr. Rachel Jessica Daniel, my conversant, for helping me and working with me on this project. So I'm going to cram in some poems from my two most recent books. And especially because this program originates in Rochester, New York, which Anna Mary Douglass and her husband, Frederick Douglass, really did some work in over 100 years ago. I'm going to read from Brief Evidence of Heaven first. I'm going to, because everybody didn't spend 2 years researching Anna Douglass, I'm just going to read you a preface to set you up. Brief Evidence of Heaven imagines the world of Anna Mary Douglass through persona poems. Douglass, whose dates are 1813 to 1882, began adulthood as a freeborn woman, working as a self-supporting housekeeper and laundress in Baltimore. She was considered conventionally illiterate and left no direct paper trail. In 1837, Anna met young Frederick Bailey, who would take the name Douglass on gaining freedom. Many historians concede that she was pivotal in his escape. By selling personal items and using her savings, she provided Douglass with money and the sailor's disguise he used to board a Baltimore steamship. However, writings by her famously literate husband of 44 years, abolitionist and women's rights advocate, rarely mention her. So I'm going to read just a few poems. I'm keying in on two particular things in my choices. When I learned that Anna Mary Douglass was functionally or conventionally illiterate, I got fascinated with how do you end up being married to one of the most literate Black men in the 19th century, and what does that mean in your life? And I decided, because I didn't have concrete evidence otherwise, that she wanted to become literate. And so there's a series of poems in the book that look at or speak to, imagine Anna speaking about language, letters, writing, and literacy. This one is called A in the Morning Dirt. And I guess just to clarify, persona poem was mentioned. A persona poem is a poem in which the voice you hear, the speaker of the poem, is not me, but I have imagined a voice in this book for Anna Mary Douglass and other people who were part of her life. A in the Morning Dirt. My mark starts the chain, leading all words from crawl and baby chatter. A names the steps to singing like that young man in Bethlehem who turns storm into hammers, who carries straw, seeds, and a world on his tongue. From the grace of A, all words walk and taste their own salt, like before they get to running, like that Miss Tubman. Guns clap to her hips like a child, going at the front with God in a thimble. I'm going to, the poems I'm reading from Brief Evidence also are going to look at Anna Mary Douglass's role in the Underground Railroad, which famously had a station in Rochester, in their home. And not many historians chose to recognize that Anna Mary Douglass was part of that initiative, as well as Frederick Douglass. So I'm going to read a bit longer poem that comes from the section of the book that looks at Rochester and what they did there. It's called Perfume. And it starts with an epigraph by the Douglas's oldest daughter, Rosetta Douglas Sprague. She says, Anna Mary Douglas's reaction to white people, particularly after the move to Rochester, was unrelaxed, and she had little capacity for interracial mingling. So this is called Perfume. Long before landing on my porch, a buzzard smell announces them far off. Columbine red washes up their necks. With hands and handkerchiefs and fans, they shoo it down. But once the tea chat falls to stuttering, words misbehave, roll off plates, and chase down the hall after their eyes. Gloves wrinkle. Upstairs, small Fred scrubs the violin. Chins wrinkle. I almost think they'll say, where are the rags, grease paper windows? We thought there would be singing and loud displays, certainly some dirt or rusted hinges, certainly no gentian on the walkway. Owlish heads twist backwards, asking to know. Wings mix up in squawking, peck the floorboard, wax where wild onions should be pushing through. Silver service for tea? Blinded, they wave off this maid or auntie, awaiting the real Mrs. Douglas. Nothing to do but pluck my china with 2 fingers, sipping nothing in their cups. Such going on, such placing feet and taking breath. Even after them, the air struggles like someone inside a sack, and the parlor sags from the stink. Now, while we have this stiff, sailing wind, I'll throw the whole house open and call my boys to carry out the chairs. What I should have said before that poem is that some of the historians I read reported that among the abolitionists of the New England and Northern US area, there was a lot of looking down on Anna Mary Douglas, and people frequently thought that she was the maid or the housekeeper in her own house. So I'm going to read another poem. This is a shorter one. And this poem directly refers to the process of moving people through the Underground Railroad in Rochester at their home. It also begins with an epigraph by Rosetta Douglas Sprague, who Rosetta wrote a small booklet about her mother, published in 1906, that I found on the internet, and it was a godsend. Rosetta writes this time, being herself one of the first agents of the Underground Railroad, Mother was an untiring worker. So the poem is stirring. By now, their breath has thawed. They're drunk on sleep. A trouser-wearing woman with one hand just sits. Her mouth stays fixed on calling seal, her daughter's dead name rubbed to burlap strands. A boy whose rough, low singing charms the room stands up, but loses words to bless the food. Some stare, some cradle every taste, some lean too near the fire as I stir. One eats the steam. This choir of beef and beans could harmonize and banish what they thought would never die. A bit of food and music is no cure in truth, but what I cook into this stew does make these shadows talk. They'll feel their new selves catch and light. Now watch what Black hands do. And the last poem I'm going to read is, again, from this section. The book is divided into sections according to their lives together, her life before Frederick Douglass in Baltimore, and later in Massachusetts after they were married, then Rochester, and then Washington, D.C., where she died, where they both died. This poem is a 7-part poem. I'm not going to read much of it. It's called Quiet. And I'm going to read a couple of bits. The first section I'll read is called With Eyes, and it mentions Harper's, which is Harper's Bazaar magazine. That's a very old magazine that was coming out in the 19th century. And it mentions North Star, which many people might know was the abolitionist newspaper that Frederick Douglass published in Rochester, New York. With Eyes. My husband oversees the world up front, where all the parlor talk is Congress and North Star and Harper's, and what they know is only what they read. When I pass, the readers squint into my mouth with eyes that you could use to sharpen something. I watch him worry, watch him when I raise my brow, watch his eyes burn off my work scarf, watch him whittle me with the corner of his mouth and blush as I go. Up front, I am a curiosity. Smoke, hail, squawking, a twisted sound out of place like a goat in the library, like a hammer in a keyhole, like a riverbank giving birth to a woman. Come where it is quiet. Come through my house to the back, where no one is afraid of what I say. Out back, in the garden, what I am teaching myself, the wild letters I marked down with a stick, don't concern the parlor. I stand at the door, black flesh of little use to them. Nothing here to buy, to know, nothing here for barter, for bluster, debate. They have what they need. They have eaten. Section 3 is called Terror. It comes from research that told me about, mostly from Rosetta, how quiet Mrs. Douglass often was around the house. Terror. Far into the night, 1 or 2 words make the difficult trip upstream. Come morning, these land, burning with a will to ride my tongue. Oh, they swell, bigger than terror. Just let my breath go slack. They spill, they spill. And the last section of Quiet is called Still. Cut me open after I go. You will find the pieces, glass and silver words, cracked, strewn in the wild trees. My house still, my house sprouting. Even now, dark, demanding crystals catch on the tail of my dress, and runaways take up the words like apples. The doors of my house will break off their hinges and fly when I say what I say. So that's brief evidence of heaven. I don't know if this is allowed, but I'm going to show you the beautiful cover, which is a collage called Betrayal that came from Theodore Harris, who's a wonderful artist and a friend of mine. So, so we're going to move on to Migration Letters, which is my new baby, very new. 5 months old. Migration Letters is a book, is a far different book. It's very personal. It looks back at my personal history as the child of people who made the Great Migration. This is when African Americans, or Black Americans, as I like to call them also, moved out of the South throughout the 20th century in large numbers and changed the country, changed the world. It looks at the experiences and values and so forth of those people who were working class and poor people from the South by and large. And then it pivots because I was raised by those people, but I was raised in the city in Philadelphia. And so I'm kind of a hybrid person because Southern people spoke to me, raised me, loved me, took me to church. But I had a different kind of road to pay for myself as somebody going forward who was born during the period when or growing up in the period when the civil rights movement was at its height, and then the Black Power movement followed on its heels. And it was a different life that I was going to lead than what my family had led. So that's what the poems get up to in brief. You'll hear more about that afterwards in the conversation. Migration Letters is a collection that has double titles. It has a number title at the top and a text title, a language, words at the bottom. And for purposes of convenience, I'm just going to read the text title and then the poem. So this is the opening poem in the book. It's called Far. My mother washed your weekly pile of panties, while P tested her own body's drawstring with a faint touch, then a nudge. She wanted to get done, to skip the field. She wanted to play. After she hung your drawers up by the scant silk rim made to catch your sweat, she dropped her head into a quiet she could own. This girl, whom you called your girl or your day girl, depending on the company, when of course she never was. Simply my mother before marriage and children camp. Nobody looking with a tilted preordained lens at a 10-year-old female, Negro, counting a times table. Wrapping a wish like a grace note, like a string around her thumb, a wish for wings. My mother squatted on the way home after her portion of, yes, ma'am, before having to make rules and beds and trace the lines. She yanked her own grayish cotton drawers aside to water a slope of pine needles, far from your gaze, far from the shade of your house. I'm going to jump a little bit because I'm looking at the time. I'm going to read a poem next called Ebony Magazine War. There's a series of Ebony Magazine poems in the book altogether, and this first one is called War. A war was going on, not far off, hungry for people like you. A growing war your parents could not shield you from or explain when they snapped off the news. Their lips pulled wide like scars half scabbed. To comb the heavy silk that passed for air, give sight to words, tamp down your dream of werewolves, fanged without foam, who might ride north to strangle, bomb, or prowl the nearby woods. You took up the armor of Black witness. Those photographs, bodies under tablecloths or coats, home to cumbersome wounds. Your finger, compass, moving through the Black world, open on your lap. Ebony Magazine is online now. I highly recommend people visit and look through those incredible issues. As I said, I'm a child of the Great Migration, or rather a grandchild of the Great Migration. And there's a series in the book called Great Migration Pentimento, which pentimento just means it's 5 of something. And so I'm going to read you one. The series of poems the whole thread has to do with me going to college and the phenomenon of a child of someone who grew up in the country, in the South, in the Jim Crow South at that, and the grandchild of people who did domestic work and had second-grade educations. And now I was going to college, and it was sort of a marvel at how, all of this experience is contained. And so I'm going to read you a fun one. It's called Great Migration Pentimento, Stetson East. Now, there's a couple things you need to know, or you may need to know. I mentioned Corvettes, which was a bargain, not really a bargain store. It was a department store that was very popular in the 60s and 70s. It closed later. And I also mentioned, very crucial to know, the Ohio Players, which was a funk band in the 70s. And if you don't know the Ohio Players, I highly recommend you check them out on YouTube. But it's important to know what that means. Okay. When you entered Stetson Hall at college, you pushed back a blue open door. You knew the words to lots of songs, but never heard of whist, the card game. Carried a cassette player and a Corvette's radio like gifts for the Christ child. Dragged in 2 pleather suitcases, sky blue, plants in liquor store boxes. Eked out a dumb, anxious smile to a girl with the same key and letter tucked in her jeans. A Jersey girl with a doctor father and a stereo, turntable, receiver and speakers, tape and radio. Hung up a cloth coat, aqua, beside the rabbit collar leather on the door. Polyester coverlet sneaked a gaze at Glen Plaid. Terry cloth robe scrutinized velour. You two would skid from dare to skank to rescue. issuing weekly vows of never again. Turned 344 into beauty hall, confessional, study parlor, box of hilarity. Enter parties sideways like Ohio players singing fire. Stomp out a few with howls the moon found amusing. But you didn't know that yet. Let's see. Can I squeeze in one? Maybe I'll just wait. Should I wait or squeeze in one more?
It's up to you, Doc.
Okay,
I think you can squeeze it in.
Okay, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. I really hope anybody on this call has heard of Jimi Hendrix. If not, you know what to do. I also mentioned something called the Dick Cavett Show, which some of you will remember and some of you won't, but it was a talk show. This is called Hendrix Once. Jimmy on Dick Cavett's show got your full attention in girly, hot funk finery and a mustache. You recognize the cobalt halo, the aqua boots of a weary prince, sapphire sweat beading his southern axe, roping the neck of his six string, lighting a down-home track in his elsewhere way. But his how and his who a tangle, traveling in his stowaway heart, invisible thread, amusement park logic, an accent that couldn't possibly compute. Blues was a gut bucket, the old women said. Did that explain why his free didn't feel free? An overhang somehow, rimming, despite his orange. Under that fried, desperate hair, his kneading, despite the brocade patches lining his pockets, white handprints all over him, white in the creases of his mouth, nobody to tell him he was ashy. His train whistle circling, his train whistle calling out names, his train whistling far off. So I'm gonna stop there, and allegedly I'll have time to close with one more, but I think it's time to talk to Dr. Daniel.
Dr. Keita, thank you so much. Your poetry is gorgeous. Like, I have a tear in one eye. And just because, you know, with every book of poetry, you level up so dramatically. Like, and you don't have to. Like, this belongs in the canon. I'm so excited. And for those of you listening, this book, which I wore to a dress to match the cover, is already being taught in some college classes. It's so, so powerful. Could you share with me a little bit about how Brief Evidence of Heaven and Migration Letters connect? What are some of the themes that they were such different books of poetry, different time periods completely, but they're still you. So I just want to hear from you. How should we think about these two texts together?
Okay, I can answer that. Both books, I see a theme with me. I resist the official story. I resist the official narratives. And both of these books center narratives and experiences and points of view that recognize people who were expected to keep silent. Whether we're talking about Black people in general, Black women, particularly poor women, such as Anna Mary Douglass was, women who are wives, definitely a category that's expected to keep silent. Even now, don't get me started. But we're not as far ahead in getting rid of patriarchy as we like to think. People expect wives to, just keep the peace. So in all of those contexts, working class people, just wipe the table and get out of here. These are people whose stories are not supposed to be considered important. And they're supposed to play along with their subservient and subordinate roles in the culture, and surrender power to the privileged people. And that's the connecting thread that I see between them above all.
So you're just writing back, typical radical revolutionary, I'm going to write these untold stories. That's the work, that's part of the work that you're doing as a poet.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. These are because this is, for another thing, these are people that have informed my gaze. I mean, I almost can't help it to a certain degree. I was in a college class, and when Brief Evidence was the book of the moment, and a question a student asked me made me realize that even though Anna Mary Douglass was born in the early 19th century, but she was a laundress, as my grandmother was. And the thing about the 19th century is Black women didn't get all that far throughout that whole century. So 100 years later, my grandmother is in rural Georgia doing the similar or the same work and making $6 an hour. An hour, what am I saying? $6 a week, excuse me, a week with 4 children. So, I realized that I was unconsciously drawing on. The kind of woman Anna Mary Douglass was the kind of woman who I saw in my grandmother and in her circle.
That's so powerful, because until you mentioned the laundress connection, so the first poem in Migration Letters is one of my favorite of all time. And I remember when we were talking, when you were writing about it. And so when I opened the book and I read that poem, it felt like a gift. But it also is something that hits me in the gut, that a child had to do this work, but I never made the connection to Douglass, who did such similar work 100 years ago.
Neither did I for a long time.
As you're writing about working class Black folks, you also write into your book a soundtrack almost. You draw on literature and history and pop culture. Could you share a little bit about where these references come from? How do you think they animate the text? What sort of story were you trying to tell with these different references?
Okay, I got a lot of things to say. I'm going to really try to compress.
Okay.
So these pop culture references these were signposts of my coming of age process. As I traveled into the moments that became poems in this book, the music was there. It was there. Ebony Magazine, which was our Black Twitter and our Black internet, was there. And by the way, I inherited my grandmama's Ebony Magazine, so I've got vintage magazines upstairs. So that was where that was where people in the Black world at that time went to be understood and to be recognized and be named. And that's where I spent Sunday afternoon after dinner at my grandma's house looking at Ebony Magazine. And then too, in terms of the music, me and my young Black people like me at that time, we were really infused with joy and hope and positive regard for ourselves by Black popular music. And I mean, namely, I grew up in the Motown era when it seemed like every week or 2 weeks, there was a new song out, a new 45. And so, that I told somebody once that we knew that the Jim Crow South was like blowing up, but and we knew that we teachers in school and other people we encountered thought we were inferior, but we had Motown, and and we knew there was evidence to the contrary. So there was that. And so again, it was just there. It was infused in anything I was looking at, thinking about, and doing. And then there was, there were the social justice music of people like Gil Scott-Heron and Nina Simone, who were helping us form ourselves and make sense of like the social upheaval that was taking place. I mean, case in point, I was when those girls, the 4 girls that were killed, that were blown up and murdered in the basement of the church, 16th Street Baptist Church. I was a Black girl who went to church every Sunday. That they reminded me of, they were just a little bit older than me. And so, we need to make ways to make sense of that. And the music helped us do that. And then too, there was the idea, thinking about Ebony Magazine again, that the music and the popular culture pieces helped me to sort of think back and understand what was happening then, because the adults, as I suggest a little bit in that poem called War, the adults were terrified. And we were not in the South, we were in Philadelphia, but they were from the South, and they knew more than they were letting on about things. And they were busy trying to insulate us by keeping silent. So the music and things like that was what sort of validated us and helped us sort of see ourselves and understand ourselves in relationship to that sort of thing. It also just puts more context to the poem. So very quickly, like there's a poem in the second section, I think, where I'm talking about elementary school. And I went to a recently integrated, in fact, it was kind of integrated through people like me, elementary school. And I was, so it mentions Dr. King, but it puts him in a very different light than we often see Dr. King. So these kind of references help the reader to ground in the period, and hopefully they recognize some of the things they hear. I have a poem to Chaka Khan, and if you don't know who Chaka Khan is, God help you, but there's still time to find out. So they just sort of help people to be in the place I was, and see, sort of have a clearer sense of what I was looking at. Because last thing I'll say is, I really dislike generalities and abstractions, particularly in poetry. So I couldn't really talk about any of this without that kind of specificity.
Yes, I would love to talk to you about form and also research, but I have my eye on the time. So I'm going to ask, what encouragement do you have for poets and other forms of writers?
Okay, I have a little list here that I can run through pretty quickly. For writers, and I guess these are, well, if the shoe fits, wear it, as the old people used to say. You need to always be reading. If you're disinclined to read, I don't think writing is for you, because reading is as important, if not maybe almost more, than writing. If get out of your genre comfort zone also with the reading. Read widely. Commit. Just simple as that. You have to commit to it. Ditch that whole lightning bolt of inspiration thing. It's a job. It's a commitment. So figure out what works for your life. As Rita Dove once told me, I had to determine a way to make this work for my life. So maybe that means you write a line a day, a paragraph. You set a thing for an alarm for 10 minutes, and just whatever's in your head. Write letters that you don't mail, whatever it is. strive to give your voice a space, though. Maybe a journal might be a good thing. For example, when I was a young mom, I was part-time, working part-time, meaning employed. A mom is 24/7, we know that. And I was running a house and I was married to a pre-tenure professor. So I was on all the time. And I met Sandra Cisneros, and she said, just set small, doable goals. And so I offer that suggestion. I also say you need to organize your life so that it's part of that commitment. So you have some little chunk of time. It might just be 10 minutes. It might be 30, but on a regular basis, I mean, ideally it's every day, but we all have those days. But you organize your life so that you get up earlier, you stay up later, you don't go to lunch with the colleagues, whatever it is, so that you can do it. And you keep your work in a stable place. You don't mix up your notebook, your poetry notebook with your shopping lists. You devote some dignity to what you're doing. If you want to publish, you study the business. And I'll just let the internet tell you what that means. Anything, everything. Listen to what writers say on podcasts, for example, like this one. Join an organization if you want to. Get in a writers group if you dare. And this is my last thing I'll say. While you are at it, sort of crafting this idea of yourself as a writer, it's important to do some level of personal work to grapple with your expectations, your insecurities, and your ego, because those things are going to flare up from time to time, and they create some difficulties. So
thank you so much for your words of wisdom. Chris, do we have time for one more reading as we head out?
I would love to have one more reading, please.
Okay, because we did start a little bit.
We started a little late, and Shaka Khan would want it, so let's do it.
The queen. Okay, so my last poem is coming from Migration Letters. It's a long poem with like 8 parts. Don't worry, only one part. It's called Letters to the First Gen North. So this is the people who are like me, whose people come from down south, but who came up in a different space. Saviors, barreling into Thanksgiving dinner late on your way to a homecoming game. Feeding a ritual that feeds you. Brimming youth or style or college credits earns you local stardom at this address. You are the newspaper of now. No buckets of water or slop, no chickens to feed, pet, or slaughter, no barriers to pencils or lights. You are born expectant, deaf to dawn's ringing hammers, in flight from a language you speak but won't own. You stutter briefly before those creaky eyes gone black as a country sky. With fingertips ignorant to the earth, the codes and textures they lived by, you pull away from the table, carrying plates, leaking from the stack, some ache only Aretha can contain. That's it. Thank you. Thank you, everybody who joined.
Oh my gosh, thank you for that delicious reading tonight. That I hope everyone who's on this is feeling fullness in whatever way that makes the most sense to them. I have chills. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us tonight. Rachel, I don't know if you wanted to say anything before I do a little outro, but I just wanted to give you more space.
Oh, thank you. Thank you to Writers and Books. Thank you to you, Chris. And thank you, Nzadi, for your poetry, for your wisdom, for your intellect, your brilliance, your kindness, your humility, and just being one of the best people I know.
Oh, I love it. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Thanks, everybody. There's links in the chat if you're interested in purchasing the books. Thank you again to Dr. Rachel Jessica Daniel for being our interviewer, and of course to our featured author tonight, Nzadi Keita. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Everyone be blessed. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.